Hey everyone, and welcome. Get ready for an amazing trip back in time, right into the heart of the ancient world, to the life-giving banks of the Great Nile River. It's here, in this unique land hugged by vast silent deserts, that one of the most fascinating and mysterious civilizations blossomed for thousands of years: ancient Egypt. We're talking about one of the greatest and most influential civilizations in all of human history. We're going to take a leisurely journey into the past to touch the secrets of powerful pharaohs whose names, carved in stone, have reached us across the ages. For centuries, people have tried to decode the complex hieroglyphs covering the walls of ancient cities, tombs, and temples, like encrypted messages from another world, which we'll try to decipher together. And hey, if you're enjoying this journey and want to make sure you don't miss out on more fascinating stories, perhaps you'd like to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It really helps us bring more content like this to you. Thanks a bunch. Now let's talk about those deserts, the Libyan and Arabian. Picture a sea of hot, shifting sand. During the day, the sun beats down mercilessly and the air shimmers with heat. But then, as night falls, a coolness settles in, and the sky above the desert transforms into a dark velvet canvas, sprinkled with countless stars. This desert, dotted with myriad bright stars, is a place of solitude, silence, and trials. But it was this very desert that became a natural defense for Egypt, shielding it from enemies and invasions, allowing the ancient Egyptian civilization to develop in relative safety and isolation, preserving its unique character for millennia. And through this desert, like a living artery, flows the Great Nile River, the very heart of Egypt, the source of its life and prosperity. The Nile begins its journey far to the south in the mountains of Central Africa and carries its waters northwards to the Mediterranean Sea, cutting right through the entire country. Along its banks stretches a narrow but incredibly beautiful and fertile valley, which they called Kemet, the Black Land, in contrast to Deshret, the Red Land of the desert. This strip of green, just a few kilometers wide in most places, was a true oasis of life, all thanks to the annual flooding of the Nile. It was here, on this blessed land, that all life was concentrated. The ancient Egyptians built their settlements here, cultivated their fields, raised livestock, fished, and created their unique civilization. The Nile wasn't just a river. It was life itself for ancient Egypt. Its importance is hard to overstate. The ancient Greeks, including the historian Herodotus, rightly called Egypt the gift of the Nile. It was thanks to this river that the country was able to become one of the greatest civilizations. In ancient times, the annual floods of the Nile, happening from June to September, were a natural wonder. The river's waters would rise, flooding the valley, and then, as they receded, they'd leave behind a thick layer of fertile silt. This silt, rich in minerals and organic matter, made the soil incredibly fertile, allowing the Egyptians to harvest 2, sometimes even 3, crops a year. Without these floods, the land of Egypt would have been as lifeless as the surrounding desert. The Egyptians learned to use the Nile's floods with maximum efficiency. They built complex irrigation systems, canals, dams, and reservoirs that allowed them to regulate water levels and irrigate their fields even during dry periods. This enabled them to create highly productive agriculture, which fed the country's large population. But the Nile was more than just a source of fertility. It was also Egypt's main transportation artery. People, goods, and even troops were transported along it. Ships and boats built from papyrus reeds or cedar wood brought all the way from Lebanon constantly sailed up and down the river, connecting different parts of the country into a single whole. The Nile facilitated trade between various regions of Egypt, as well as with neighboring lands like Nubia to the south and Mediterranean countries to the north. Thanks to the Nile, Egypt could maintain contact with the outside world, develop trade relations, and even transport the massive stone blocks needed for building pyramids and temples. Without this waterway, the grand monuments of ancient Egypt simply couldn't have been created. The Nile was also a source of spiritual inspiration. The ancient Egyptians deified the river, considering it a living being, a source of life and well-being. The god Hapi, personifying the Nile and its fertile flood, was one of the most revered gods in the Egyptian pantheon. He was often depicted as a portly man with blue or green skin, symbolizing water, and sometimes with a papyrus and lotus headdress or even female breasts, symbolizing fertility. Egyptians believed that the Nile's floods were Hapi's gift, and they made sacrifices to him to ensure a rich harvest. Special festivals were held in honor of the Nile. The entire life of the ancient Egyptians was inextricably linked with the Nile. The rhythm of their lives was determined by its cycles. The river's floods brought fertility, while drought brought famine and hardship. The Nile was a source of both life and death, a blessing and a curse. It shaped not only the landscape of Egypt, but also the worldview, culture, and religion of its inhabitants. Just imagine the Nile flowing slowly and majestically, carrying its waters through millennia, a silent witness to the birth, flourishing, and decline of a great civilization. Hear the gentle lapping of the water, the rustle of papyrus in the wind, the distant songs of the fellahin, farmers, working in the fields. Feel the warm breath of the desert and the life-giving coolness of the river. Let yourself sink into the atmosphere of antiquity, tranquility, and the sense of eternity that the great Nile offers us. The history of ancient Egypt is a narrative that spans an incredible period, more than 3,000 years. This amazing civilization, one of the most ancient and long-lasting in human history, left behind a legacy that has influenced the development of world civilization. It's hard to overestimate the significance of the culture, science, and art that emerged on the banks of the Nile. Around 3100 BCE, according to tradition, the legendary Pharaoh Menes, or Narmer, united the warring kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt, creating a single centralized state. And this state, with its unique culture and complex social structure, endured, experiencing periods of rise and fall, until 30 BCE. That's when Egypt, after the defeat of its last queen, Cleopatra VII, and her lover Mark Antony, became a province of the mighty Roman Empire. Over these long millennia, Egyptian civilization traveled a complex and fascinating path of development. Periods of incredible flourishing, known to historians as the Old Kingdom, the era of the Great Pyramids, the Middle Kingdom, a time of strengthening the state and expanding influence, and the New Kingdom, the Imperial period, the age of Thutmose, Akhenaten, and Rameses, were interspersed with periods of decline, fragmentation, internal strife, and foreign conquests. But even in the most difficult times, Egyptian culture retained its uniqueness and resilience, rising again and again like a phoenix from the ashes. It left behind an innumerable number of monuments that continue to fascinate, amaze, and puzzle us. Today, majestic pyramids rise above the desert like man-made mountains. Grandiose temples dedicated to the gods, with their colonnades, statues, and reliefs, still stand. Mysterious tombs of pharaohs, filled with treasures and art objects, have been discovered. Intricately prepared mummies have preserved the appearance of people who lived thousands of years ago. Complex hieroglyphs cover the walls of temples and papyrus scrolls, telling captivating myths and legends about gods, heroes, and the creation of the world. All this is undeniable evidence of the greatness, uniqueness, and unsurpassed skill of ancient masters. At the very heart of ancient society and the state stood the pharaoh. This wasn't just a king or ruler in our usual understanding. For the Egyptians, the pharaoh was a living god on earth, the son of the sun, god Ra, the earthly incarnation of the god Horus, and a mediator between the world of gods and the world of humans. The pharaoh was believed to ensure Ma'at, cosmic order, harmony, and justice throughout the universe. He was the guarantor of stability, the protector of Egypt from enemies, and the source of the land's fertility and the people's well-being. The pharaoh possessed absolute power. He was the supreme priest, commander-in-chief of the army, supreme judge, and legislator. His will was law, and his word was truth. The pharaoh was surrounded by incredible luxury, splendor, and strict ceremony. He lived in a huge palace resembling an entire city, surrounded by gardens, ponds, and temples, along with numerous courtiers, officials, priests, servants, and slaves, all ready to fulfill his every wish. Every step, every action of the pharaoh was regulated by strict rules and rituals. He participated in the most important religious ceremonies, making offerings to the gods and communicating with them on behalf of all the people. He received ambassadors from other countries, made treaties, corresponded with other rulers, and led military campaigns, expanding Egypt's borders and strengthening its power. He decided the most important state affairs, appointed officials, controlled tax collection, and managed the distribution of resources. His life was inextricably linked with the well-being of all Egypt, and the fate of the entire country depended on his wisdom, strength, and piety. One of the pharaoh's main concerns, taking up a significant part of his life and state resources, was the construction of his tomb, his house of eternity for his Ka, life force, and Ba, soul. The ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife and thought that after death, a person's soul continued to exist in another world. They believed that for this eternal life, the deceased's body needed to be preserved intact. That's why they developed a complex and sophisticated technique of mummification, which allowed bodies to be preserved for millennia. The mummification process was long, complex, and expensive, available mainly to pharaohs and the nobility. It involved removing internal organs, treating the body with special substances, drying it out, and wrapping it in linen bandages. The mummy was then placed in a sarcophagus, often richly decorated with carvings and paintings, and installed in the tomb. Pharaohs, as gods on earth, built majestic tombs for themselves, intended to ensure their eternal life and prosperity in the afterlife. During the Old Kingdom, these were primarily pyramids, constructed from enormous stone blocks. In the New Kingdom, pharaohs were often buried in rock-cut tombs carved into the Valley of the Kings, near Thebes. These tombs, hidden from prying eyes, were also striking in their complexity, size, and the richness of their decoration. The walls of the tombs were covered with paintings and reliefs depicting scenes from the pharaoh's life, his deeds, religious rituals, and the soul's journey into the afterlife. The tombs were filled with untold treasures, gold jewelry, precious stones, statues, furniture, weapons, chariots, everyday objects, food and drink, everything the Egyptians believed the pharaoh would need in his eternal life. Building these pyramids and tombs was a grandiose project, requiring the mobilization of vast human and material resources. Thousands of peasant laborers worked on construction sites during the Nile's flood season when field work was suspended. Skilled artisans, stonemasons, artists, architects, as well as prisoners of war and slaves, participated in erecting these gigantic structures. The pyramids of Giza, built by the pharaohs Khufu, Cheops, Khafre, Chephren, and Menkaure, are the most famous and impressive of all Egyptian pyramids. They still evoke admiration for their size, geometric precision, and the engineering genius of the ancient builders. How they managed to move and lift multi-ton stone blocks without modern technology remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Religion and mythology permeated every aspect of ancient Egyptian life. They believed in a vast number of gods and goddesses who governed various aspects of the universe, natural phenomena, and human activities. The Egyptian pantheon was extremely complex and diverse, numbering hundreds of deities, each with its own functions, attributes, and cult centers. At the head of the pantheon stood Ra, the sun god, creator of the world, source of light and life, and father of gods and humans. His cult was one of the oldest and most important in Egypt. Osiris, god of the afterlife, judge of the dead, and symbol of rebirth, was another crucial deity. His tragic story of death and resurrection formed the basis of many Egyptian religious beliefs about the afterlife. His faithful wife, Isis, goddess of motherhood, magic, wisdom, and healing, was considered a great sorceress and protectress of women, children, and all who suffered. Their son, Horus, god of the sky and kingship, depicted as a falcon or a falcon-headed man, was the patron of the pharaohs, who were considered his earthly incarnations. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, was the patron of embalming and funerary rituals. He guided the souls of the dead to the afterlife and participated in the judgment of Osiris. Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, accounting, and knowledge, depicted as an ibis or a baboon, was considered the inventor of writing and the patron of scribes, scholars, and all who sought knowledge. Hathor, goddess of love, beauty, music, dance, and motherhood, often depicted as a cow or a woman with cow horns, brought joy, festivity, and fertility to people. Set, god of the desert, chaos, storms, and war, was the brother and murderer of Osiris, embodying evil and destructive forces. Yet he was also considered a protector of Ra during his nightly journey through the underworld. And this is just a small part of the vast Egyptian pantheon. Priests played a key role in ancient Egyptian society. They were not just servants of the gods, but also keepers of sacred knowledge and mediators between the human world and the divine. They conducted complex religious rites and ceremonies in temples, made offerings to the gods, interpreted dreams, and made predictions. Their knowledge was often linked to astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and other sciences. Priests held enormous influence and authority. Their word carried weight, and their skills were essential for maintaining order and well-being in the country. They also played an important role in political life, acting as advisors to pharaohs and participating in state administration. Temples where priests served were not only religious centers, but also major economic and cultural hubs, owning vast lands, workshops, and libraries. Ancient Egyptian mythology is an incredibly rich and complex world, woven from fascinating stories, deep symbols, and ancient beliefs. It's not just a collection of tales, it's a comprehensive system of understanding that explain the origin of the universe, the nature of the gods, the meaning of human life, and the mysteries of the afterlife. Myths were an integral part of every Egyptian's life, permeating everything from religious rituals and state ceremonies to daily customs and personal beliefs. They were recited in majestic temples during festive services, passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth, depicted in vibrant colors on the walls of tombs and temples, and recorded in complex hieroglyphs on papyrus scrolls. Myths shaped the worldview of the ancient Egyptians, preserved their moral values and cultural identity, and helped them find meaning and order in the world around them. One of the most important and revered mythological cycles, which had a huge impact on Egyptian religious beliefs, was the myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. This dramatic story of love, betrayal, death, and resurrection became the foundation for many crucial beliefs, especially those related to the afterlife and the fate of the human soul. According to the myth, Osiris was not just a god, but also the first king of Egypt, a kind and wise ruler who brought civilization to the land. He taught people agriculture, winemaking, and house building. He established just laws and the cult of the gods. Under Osiris, Egypt prospered, and people lived in peace and harmony. However, Osiris had an envious and treacherous brother, Set, the god of desert, chaos, and war. Set envied Osiris's power and popularity and decided to get rid of him to seize the throne. Set devised a cruel plan. He secretly measured Osiris's body and ordered a luxurious sarcophagus made to his brother's exact dimensions, decorated with gold and precious stones. Then he threw a lavish feast, inviting Osiris and other gods. During the feast, Set brought out the magnificent sarcophagus and announced he would gift it to whoever it fit perfectly. Many gods tried it, but it was either too big or too small. Finally, it was Osiris's turn. As soon as he lay down in it, Set's conspirators slammed the heavy lid shut, nailed it down, and sealed it with molten lead. Then they threw the sarcophagus with Osiris's body into the Nile. Osiris's faithful and loving wife, Isis, a great sorceress, was overcome with grief when she learned what happened. She cut her beautiful hair, dressed in mourning clothes, and embarked on a long and perilous journey to find her husband's body. After much searching, she discovered that the sarcophagus had washed ashore in Byblos in Phoenicia and had become encased within a massive heather tree that exuded a wonderful fragrance. The king of Byblos had the tree cut down and used as a pillar in his palace. Isis, arriving in Byblos disguised as an ordinary woman, managed to become the nursemaid to the royal son. Through her magical abilities and the queen's favor, she was eventually given the pillar. Isis brought Osiris's body back to Egypt and hid it in the Nile Delta's dense papyrus swamps, intending to resurrect him. However, the treacherous Set, while hunting by moonlight, stumbled upon the sarcophagus. Enraged that his plan might fail, he dismembered Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them throughout Egypt. But Isis's love was stronger than death. Aided by her sister Nephthys, Set's wife, who secretly sympathized with Osiris and Isis, she set out again, this time to find the scattered pieces of her beloved. Traveling by papyrus boat, she eventually found all the parts except for the phallus, which had been eaten by a fish, making that fish taboo. Using her powerful magic and knowledge from Thoth, Isis reassembled Osiris's body, fashioned the missing part from clay, and transforming into a kite, a type of falcon, she hovered over his body, fanning him with her wings and chanting magical spells, conceiving their son, Horus. Then Isis, along with Anubis, performed the first mummification, preserving Osiris's body for eternal life. The resurrected Osiris could not return to full earthly life, but became the ruler of Duat, the underworld, where he wisely and justly judged the souls of the dead, granting eternal life to the righteous. Horus, son of Osiris and Isis, grew up in secret, hidden by his mother in the inaccessible marshes of the Nile Delta. When he came of age, he entered into a fierce struggle with his uncle Set for his father's inheritance and the throne of Egypt. This struggle lasted for many years, filled with trials, battles, and magical duels. In one battle, Set tore out Horus's left eye, the Wadjet, symbolizing the moon. But Thoth healed it. This healed eye became a powerful symbol of healing, protection, and wholeness. Eventually, Horus defeated Set, restored Ma'at, cosmic order, and became the new king of Egypt. Egyptian pharaohs were considered the earthly incarnations of Horus. The myth of Osiris, Isis, and Horus was not just an engaging story. It was a sacred text enacted during important religious festivals, reminding Egyptians of the eternal struggle between good and evil, life and death, the importance of family ties, loyalty and love, and the hope for resurrection and eternal life. Beliefs about the afterlife were central to the ancient Egyptian worldview. They believed a person consisted of several parts: the physical body, Khat, the shadow, Shwit, the name, Ren, the soul, Bia, and the life force, Ka. Death was seen not as an end, but as a transition to another world where the soul and life force continued to exist, but only if the physical body was preserved. This is why mummification and tomb building were so important. The afterlife, Duat, was imagined as a complex, multi-layered realm inhabited by gods, spirits, and dangerous monsters. The soul's journey through Duat was fraught with trials. The soul had to cross an underground river, pass through numerous gates guarded by fearsome beings, answer questions from gods, and overcome various obstacles. To navigate successfully, the deceased needed magical knowledge, spells, and amulets, recorded in texts like the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and most famously, the Book of the Dead. This collection of hymns, prayers, and magical formulas was placed in the tomb and served as a guidebook to the afterlife. The culmination of this journey was the judgment of Osiris. This was the most crucial test. Imagine a majestic hall, the Hall of Two Truths, where Osiris sits enthroned, surrounded by 42 divine judges. The deceased soul had to make the negative confession, declaring they had not committed various sins. I have not killed, I have not stolen, I have not lied, etc. Then came the weighing of the heart. On one side of a scale, Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice, placed the deceased's heart, seen as the seat of conscience and memory. On the other, she placed her feather, a symbol of truth. Anubis supervised the weighing, and Thoth recorded the result. If the heart was lighter than or equal to the feather, the deceased had lived a righteous life and was declared true of voice, makeru. Such a soul went to the fields of Yalu, or Aru, the Egyptian paradise, a blessed place of eternal joy and abundance. If the heart, heavy with sins, outweighed the feather, the soul faced a terrible fate. It was devoured by Ammit, a monstrous creature with the features of a crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. This meant final death, the complete annihilation of the soul. This profound belief in an afterlife judgment greatly influenced the moral norms of Egyptian society, encouraging people to strive for a righteous life. Despite their deep religiosity and constant concern for the afterlife, the daily life of ancient Egyptians was filled with work, joys, sorrows, and cares, much like people in any other era. The vast majority of the population were peasant farmers, fellahin, who cultivated the fertile lands in the Nile Valley. Their lives were hard and entirely dependent on the Nile's floods and the will of the gods, the pharaoh, and local officials. They lived in small villages along the Nile's banks in simple houses built of sun-dried mud bricks, a mixture of clay, straw, and water. These houses were cool in the heat but required constant repair. A typical house had a few rooms, a living area, a kitchen, a storeroom, and a flat roof often used as extra living space for sleeping on hot nights, drying grain, or spending time with family. Furniture was simple and functional: reed mats or palm leaves for sleeping and sitting, low wooden stools and tables, and chests or baskets for storage. Their clothing was also simple, adapted to the hot climate, and made mostly of linen. Men wore kilt-like loincloths of varying lengths and simple shirts. Women wore long, straight, often form-fitting dresses, usually with shoulder straps. The clothing of wealthy Egyptians was made of finer linen, with more complex tailoring and rich decoration. Egyptians paid great attention to their appearance and hygiene. They bathed regularly and used various oils and perfumes to moisturize their skin. Both men and women wore wigs made of human hair or plant fibers and used cosmetics, kohl to outline their eyes, and red ochre for their lips and cheeks. They also loved jewelry, necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and rings, made from materials ranging from simple stone, glass, and faience beads to exquisite pieces of gold, silver, and precious stones. The diet of ancient Egyptians was fairly varied, though it depended on social status and wealth. The staples were bread, baked as flatbreads or loaves, and beer, thick and nutritious, both made from barley and emmer wheat. They also ate plenty of vegetables like onions, garlic, lettuce, and cucumbers, and fruits such as dates, figs, grapes, watermelons, and melons. Fish from the Nile was an important source of protein. Meat, beef, mutton, goat, wild game, and poultry, ducks, geese, pigeons, were less common, usually enjoyed on holidays or by the wealthy. They also loved sweets made from honey, dates, and fruits. Family in ancient Egypt was a sacred institution, the foundation of society. Marriage was an important step towards procreation and ensuring family well-being, both in this life and the next. While marriages were often arranged by parents based on social status and wealth, personal feelings like love and affection also played a role. Ancient Egyptian love poetry, preserved on papyri, is full of tender sentiments, descriptions of a beloved's beauty, and the joys and sorrows of love. These texts show that ancient Egyptians valued deep emotional connections. Loyalty and devotion between spouses were important virtues. Tomb paintings often depict husbands and wives sitting close, holding hands, or embracing, emphasizing their closeness. While pharaohs and nobles might have multiple wives and concubines, monogamy was the norm for most. The principal wife held a special position as mistress of the household and mother of the children. Children were considered a gift from the gods and a great joy. Having many children was a sign of prosperity. Boys usually followed in their father's footsteps, inheriting their profession, farming, a craft, or military service. Sons of nobles and priests received education in temple schools or palaces, learning reading, writing, arithmetic, and other subjects. Girls generally stayed home, learning household management, childcare, and various female crafts like weaving and spinning from their mothers. Respect for elders, especially parents, was a core value. The position of women in ancient Egypt was quite unique for the ancient world. Unlike in many other civilizations where women were largely subservient and without rights, Egyptian women enjoyed considerable freedom and independence. They could own and manage property, inherit from their parents, and enter into marriage contracts that guaranteed their rights in case of divorce or widowhood. They could move about freely, attend public events, and participate in religious festivals. They could even act in court as witnesses, plaintiffs, or defendants. Women could pursue various professions, not just as homemakers and mothers, but also as weavers, brewers, merchants, musicians, dancers, priestesses, and even doctors. Some women, like Hatshepsut, even ruled as pharaohs. Egyptian art frequently depicts women alongside men, highlighting their important role in family and society. Besides farming, artisans formed a significant part of ancient Egyptian society. They lived mainly in cities and specialized in making various goods needed for daily life, religious rites, and funerary practices. Egyptian artisans were true masters, and their skills reached incredible heights. Potters created diverse pottery from clay, pots, jugs, bowls, plates, which were fired in kilns and often decorated with paint or reliefs. Weavers produced linen fabrics of varying fineness. Egyptian linen was famed for its whiteness and strength and was used for clothing, bed linen, sails, and mummy wrappings. Carpenters and joiners worked with wood, which was scarce in Egypt and often imported from Lebanon, Nubia. They made furniture, chairs, tables, beds, chests, wooden sarcophagi, boats, chariots, doors, and windows. Stonemasons quarried and worked with stone, limestone, sandstone, granite, basalt, alabaster, which was widely used in building temples, tombs, pyramids, obelisks, and statues. They demonstrated amazing skill in cutting and shaping massive blocks. Jewelers created exquisite ornaments from gold, silver, and precious, semi-precious stones, necklaces, bracelets, earrings, rings, amulets, and pectorals, all stunning in their craftsmanship and rich decoration. Smiths worked with copper, bronze, and later iron to make tools, weapons, and household items like hoes, sickles, axes, swords, spears, knives, and mirrors. The products of Egyptian artisans were renowned far beyond Egypt's borders and are priceless testaments to their advanced craftsmanship. Scribes held a privileged position in ancient Egypt's social hierarchy. In an era when literacy was rare, scribes were the keepers of knowledge, culture, and state order. They were the intellectual elite, mastering the complex and mysterious art of hieroglyphic writing. Egyptian hieroglyphs were a unique system combining ideograms, signs for whole concepts, objects, phonograms, signs for sounds, syllables, and determinatives, signs clarifying meaning. Mastering the hundreds, sometimes thousands of signs took years of diligent study. Scribal training began at an early age in special schools, usually attached to temples or palaces. Students, mostly boys from noble or wealthy families, learned hieroglyphs, reading, writing, arithmetic, and subjects like astronomy, mathematics, geometry, medicine, literature, and religion. The training was rigorous. Students copied texts for hours, memorized spells and hymns, and solved mathematical problems. Punishment for laziness was common, but those who successfully completed their training gained access to the prestigious and well-paid profession of a scribe. Scribes were in demand everywhere. They worked in temples, copying sacred texts and composing hymns. They served at the courts of pharaohs and nobles, handling correspondence and drafting official documents. They worked in administrative offices, overseeing tax collection and land records. They served in the army, keeping track of soldiers and supplies. Some engaged in scientific research, studying stars, developing the calendar, or practicing medicine. Scribes were more than just copyists. They were scholars, administrators, lawyers, and teachers. The profession was highly respected, offering access to power and wealth and exemption from hard physical labor and military service. Be a scribe, one ancient text advises, and your body will be smooth, your hand soft, and you will go forth in white apparel and be honored. Thanks to scribes, a vast number of written sources have survived, allowing us to reconstruct the history, culture, religion, and daily life of ancient Egypt. The decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs in the early 19th century by Jean-François Champollion was a key event, opening up the rich world of Egyptian writing and culture. The art and architecture of ancient Egypt are a majestic and multifaceted heritage that continues to fascinate and inspire us. Deeply imbued with religious meaning and a striving for eternity and order, Egyptian art is characterized by its monumentality, stillness, symbolism, and strict adherence to canon. It aimed not so much to reflect reality as to embody eternal truths, affirm divine order, and ensure immortality for pharaohs and nobles. Ancient Egyptian architecture is astounding in its colossal scale. The giant pyramids built during the Old Kingdom at Giza, Saqqara, and Dashur are not just tombs, but monumental symbols of divine power and connection to the cosmos. Imagine the grandeur of the Great Pyramid of Giza, for millennia the tallest structure on Earth, its perfectly smooth faces oriented to the cardinal directions, its complex internal structure, all testifying to an incredible level of engineering and organizational skill. How they moved and lifted multi-ton stone blocks remains a marvel. Equally impressive are the ancient Egyptian temples dedicated to the gods, such as the temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor, Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahri, and the temples at Abu Simbel. These grandiose structures were designed to create an indelible impression, emphasizing the power of gods and pharaohs. Picture massive pylons, gateway towers adorned with reliefs, spacious courtyards with colonnades, hypostyle halls filled with a forest of giant columns resembling papyrus or lotus stalks, and sanctuaries where statues of gods were kept. Walls were covered with vibrant paintings and reliefs depicting myths, religious rites, and pharaohs' military victories, creating an atmosphere of sacred awe. Sculptures of pharaohs, gods, and officials are notable for their monumentality and formal severity. Made from hard stone, granite, basalt, diorite, or wood, they are often huge, depicting figures in static, frozen poses full of calm majesty. Faces are usually idealized, embodying an eternal image rather than an individual. Strict canons dictated poses and proportions that remained unchanged for centuries. Figures seated on thrones or standing with the left foot forward, their gaze fixed on eternity. Alongside this official monumental sculpture, there was also more lively, realistic sculpture in smaller forms, depicting scenes of daily life, servants, artisans, animals. These small statuettes found in tombs give us a glimpse into the real lives of ancient Egyptians. Ancient Egyptian painting is mainly represented by murals on tomb and temple walls, as well as on sarcophagi and papyri. Artists used bright, saturated mineral pigments, which, thanks to Egypt's dry climate, have retained their freshness to this day. Tomb paintings depicted scenes from the deceased's earthly life, service, hunting, feasting, and the afterlife, the soul's journey, the judgment of Osiris, life in the fields of Ialu, all intended to ensure well-being in the next world. Temple paintings showed gods, religious rites, and mythological scenes. Egyptian painting has a characteristic style: flatness, lack of perspective, clear outlines, and local colors. Human figures were depicted according to a strict canon: head and legs in profile, shoulders and eyes frontal. The size of figures depended on their social status. Pharaohs and gods were larger than commoners. Despite these conventions, Egyptian painting possesses a unique expressiveness and decorative quality. Ancient Egyptian literature was highly developed and diverse, including religious texts, hymns, prayers, spells, myths, historical chronicles, wisdom literature, teachings and advice, tales of adventure and magic, love poetry, and business and scientific writings, treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine. It was written in hieroglyphs on papyrus, as well as on temple and tomb walls, stelae, wooden tablets, and ostraca, pottery shards. These literary monuments are invaluable sources of information about the worldview, beliefs, moral values, and cultural achievements of the ancient Egyptians. Music and dance also played an important role, accompanying religious ceremonies and secular festivities. Music was heard in temples, at banquets, during military campaigns, and in processions. Egyptians used various instruments: strings, harps, lyres, lutes, winds, flutes, double oboes, trumpets, and percussion, drums, tambourines, sistra, rattles used in Hathor's cult. Music could be solemn or lively. Dances were an integral part of celebrations, being either ritualistic, worshiping gods, enacting myths, or entertaining, performed by professionals at feasts. Ancient Egyptians also achieved a high level of scientific knowledge, especially in fields related to practical needs like construction, agriculture, and medicine. In mathematics, they developed a decimal system and could perform complex arithmetic operations and solve geometric problems necessary for land surveying and construction. In astronomy, by observing the movements of stars and planets, they created an accurate solar calendar of 365 days, divided into 3 seasons of 4 months each. Egyptian physicians possessed extensive knowledge of anatomy and medicine. They could treat various diseases, perform complex surgical operations, and prepare medicines from plants and minerals. Medical knowledge was recorded on papyri like the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, crucial sources about ancient Egyptian medicine. The ancient Egyptian civilization, existing for over 3 millennia, left an indelible mark on human history. Its achievements in architecture, art, science, religion, philosophy, and governance had a huge influence on the development of many other civilizations, including Greek and Roman, and through them on all of Western culture. Studying ancient Egypt helps us better understand human history, appreciate the diversity of cultures, and reflect on eternal questions about life, death, the meaning of existence, and humanity's place in the universe, questions that have troubled people throughout time and continue to concern us today. The legacy of ancient Egypt is not just ruins. It's a living memory of a great civilization that continues to speak to us. And now, as our long and fascinating journey through ancient Egypt comes to a close, as we've become acquainted with its history, culture, and beliefs, as you've imagined the lives of people who lived thousands of years ago on the banks of the Nile, allow yourself to completely relax and drift into the world of dreams. Picture the calm, majestic waters of the Nile reflecting billions of stars in the night sky. Imagine the magnificent pyramids reaching upwards as if they were bridges between earth and sky, holding the secrets of Pharaohs and eternity within them. Hear the quiet whisper of the wind blowing from the desert, carrying with it the sands of time. Feel the atmosphere of peace, harmony, and eternity that envelops the ancient land of Egypt. Let these images soothe you, and may your sleep be deep, peaceful, and restorative.